April 9th, 1942. The day Pride died. To understand the march, you have to understand the 4 months that came before it. We were the battling bastards of Bataan. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam. We were fighting on a peninsula in the Philippines, cut off from the world. The U.S. Navy had been destroyed at Pearl Harbor. There were no reinforcements coming. There was no food coming. We were fighting the Japanese Empire with World War I rifles and 1918 grenades that didn't explode. But the enemy wasn't the Japanese soldier. It was starvation. We were living on 800 calories a day, a cup of watery rice, and maybe, if you were lucky, a piece of monkey meat or iguana. Men were skeletons. You could count every rib. Our uniforms hung off us like sacks. Then came the diseases. Malaria, dengue, beriberi, dysentery. Have you ever seen a man with beriberi? His legs swell up like balloons filled with fluid, while the rest of his body wastes away. By April, 75,000 of us were huddled in the jungle. We weren't an army anymore. We were a massive armed hospital ward. We were hallucinations walking on 2 legs. General Edward King, our commander, looked at us. He saw men who couldn't lift their rifles. He saw men dying in their own filth. He knew that if he ordered us to fight one more day, it wouldn't be a battle. It would be a massacre. So, he did the unthinkable. He surrendered. It was the largest capitulation in American history. We cried. Not tears of sadness, but tears of rage. We smashed our rifles against trees so the Japanese couldn't use them. We buried the American flag so they couldn't desecrate it. We thought the surrender was the end of the suffering. We thought, okay, we are prisoners now. They have to feed us. They have to treat us according to the Geneva Convention. We were naive. We didn't know the Japanese Bushido Code. To them, a soldier who surrenders is not a human being. He is subhuman. He has no honor. He deserves nothing but contempt and death. We gathered at the assembly point in Mariveles. The sun was beating down. 105 degrees. The dust was choking. The Japanese soldiers looked at us. They didn't see prisoners. They saw cattle, and they had a long way to drive us. The march began with the Shakedown. The Japanese guards moved through the ranks. They were looking for souvenirs, watches, rings, fountain pens, lighters. If you had a ring that wouldn't come off your swollen finger because of the heat and edema. They didn't wait. They didn't use soap. They used a bayonet. They cut the finger off to get the gold. I saw a man lose his hand for a wristwatch. They took our canteens. This was the death sentence. In the Philippines, in April, the sun is a physical weight. It hammers you. Without water, you die in hours. We started walking. Hurry up! Speedo! Speedo! The guards screamed. If you stumbled, they hit you with a rifle butt. If you fell, they kicked you. If you didn't get up, they bayoneted you. The road was made of crushed white limestone. Thousands of feet churned it into a fine, suffocating powder. It coated your throat. It coated your lungs. You coughed up white mud. The column stretched for miles. A river of misery flowing north. Then, the killing started in earnest. I remember the first one I saw. A young kid, maybe 18. He had malaria. He was shaking. He stopped to tie his shoe. A Japanese guard walked up behind him. He didn't shout. He didn't warn him. He just swung his rifle like a baseball bat. The butt of the gun smashed into the kid's skull. The sound was like a melon breaking. The kid fell. The guard laughed. Then he bayoneted him in the back, wiped the blade on the kid's shirt, and walked away. We were in shock. We wanted to kill that guard. But we were weak, unarmed, and surrounded by tanks. We learned the rule instantly. Don't stop. Don't fall. Don't help anyone. If you stop to help a buddy, you both die. We walked past the bodies. Soon the bodies weren't just individuals. They were road markers. Every 100 yards, a corpse, flattened by Japanese tanks that deliberately swerved to run them over. The smell of blood mixed with the smell of the dust and the heat. And the thirst. The thirst became a madness. We walked past artesian wells. clear, cold water bubbling out of the ground. The guards would stand in front of them with bayonets. No water, no water. They let the water run into the dirt while we watched, our tongues swelling in our mouths, our lips cracking and bleeding. It was psychological torture. They wanted to see us beg. They wanted to see us turn into animals. And some of us did. Men drank water from carabao wallows, muddy puddles filled with buffalo feces. They knew it would give them dysentery. They knew it would kill them, but they couldn't help it. They drank, and an hour later, they were vomiting blood, falling out of line, and waiting for the bayonet. We were only on the second day. We had 60 miles to go. By the third day, the Japanese guards got bored with just beating us. They invented a new game. They called it the sun treatment. At high noon, when the Philippine sun was a white hammer in the sky, they would halt the column. Stop, sit down. We thought it was a rest break. We collapsed on the burning asphalt or the white limestone dust. We gasped for air. But then came the order. No hats, look up. They forced us to take off our helmets and our improvised rags. They made us sit there, bareheaded, facing the sun. For 1 hour, 2 hours, sometimes 4. We weren't allowed to move. We weren't allowed to shift our weight. We certainly weren't allowed to drink. If you lowered your head, a rifle butt smashed into your neck. It was a slow, calculated cooking of the human brain. I remember the feeling of my scalp tightening. It felt like my skin was shrinking, pulling away from my skull. My lips, already cracked and bleeding, dried into hard scabs. My tongue swelled until it filled my entire mouth. It felt like a piece of dry felt. The world turned white. The edges of my vision started to blur. The heat waves rising off the road looked like water. Shimmering, cool water. That's when the madness started. The man next to me, a corporal from New Mexico, started giggling. It was a dry, rasping sound. He pointed at the Japanese guard. Look, he whispered. He's holding a Coca-Cola. It's got ice in it. There was no Coke. The guard was holding a bayonet. But the corporal stood up. He stumbled toward the guard, reaching out with a shaking hand. Gimme a sip, buddy. Just a sip. The guard didn't even blink. He lunged. The bayonet went in. The corporal fell. He didn't scream. He just sighed, as if the steel in his gut was a relief from the sun. We watched him die. We felt nothing. No sorrow, no anger, just envy. He didn't have to walk anymore. The sun treatment did something to your mind. It stripped away your humanity layer by layer. You stopped thinking about your family. You stopped thinking about the war. You stopped thinking about God. You only thought about water. Water became God. I hallucinated that I was swimming in a glacial lake. I could feel the cold water on my skin. I could taste it. I started making swimming motions with my arms, sitting there in the dust. My buddy slapped me. Stop it, stay with me. If you went Asiatic, that's what we called going crazy, you were dead. Because if you couldn't stand up when the whistle blew, you were left behind. And being left behind meant meeting the cleanup squad. We never saw them, but we heard them. They were a special unit of Japanese soldiers who marched a few hundred yards behind the main column. Their job was simple: finish the stragglers. When the column started moving again, anyone who couldn't rise, anyone who had passed out from heat stroke, was left on the side of the road. As we marched away, we would hear it. Bang, bang, bang. Single shots. Executions. Sometimes, to save bullets, they used bayonets or bamboo clubs. We heard the thuds. The screams cut short. The cleanup squad was the Grim Reaper following in our footprints. It forced us to keep moving even when our muscles had turned to jelly. The fear of that gunshot behind us was the only fuel we had left. I remember walking while asleep. My legs kept moving, but my brain was shut down. I would wake up when I bumped into the man in front of me. He was dead too, walking on instinct. We were a procession of zombies, marching through a furnace, guided only by the terror of what lay behind us. As the march dragged on, a strange thing happened near the town of Balanga. The Japanese guards began to separate us. They pulled the American prisoners to one side of the road, and the Filipino prisoners to the other. We didn't know why. We thought maybe they were separating us for transport. We watched our Filipino brothers, the men we had fought beside in the foxholes, the men who had shared their last handful of rice with us, being marched away down a side trail toward the Pantingan River. They looked back at us. Some waved, some looked relieved, thinking they were being released. We never saw them again. What happened at the Pantingan River was not a march. It was a slaughter. It originated from an order by Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, a Japanese officer who believed that the Philippines should be cleansed of anyone who had served the Americans. He issued a secret directive: dispose of them. About 400 Filipino officers and non-commissioned officers were herded into a ravine. The location was beautiful. Tall trees shaded the riverbank. The water was cool and clear. For a moment, the prisoners thought they had been brought there to rest, to drink, to wash the dust of the road from their wounds. But then, the Japanese trucks arrived. Japanese officers stepped out. They weren't carrying rifles. They were carrying katanas, traditional samurai swords. They ordered the Filipinos to sit in rows. Then, they began to tie them. They used telephone wire. They tied their hands behind their backs. They tied them together in groups of 10. Panic started to ripple through the ranks. Why are you tying us? We are prisoners of war. The guards didn't answer. They just tightened the wire until it cut into the skin. A Japanese officer stood on the hood of a truck. He spoke calmly. He told them that they had betrayed their Asian heritage by fighting for the white man. He told them that their lives were forfeit. And then, the butchery began. It was done with a chilling, ritualistic efficiency. The Japanese officers took off their tunics. They rolled up their sleeves. They drew their swords. The blades glinted in the dappled sunlight, filtering through the trees. They walked down the lines of kneeling men. The sound of a sword hitting a human neck is a sound that no one should ever hear. It is a wet thud, followed by the hiss of air escaping the lungs. Heads rolled into the grass. Bodies slumped forward, pumping blood into the soil. When the officers got tired, the enlisted men took over with bayonets. They moved methodically from man to man. Thrust, twist, pull. The Filipinos begged. They prayed. They cried out the names of their wives and children. Madre de Dios, mercy! But there was no mercy at the Pantingan River. The screams echoed off the canyon walls, but there was no one to hear them except the birds. Soon, the screams died down. They were replaced by the gurgling of the dying and the buzz of a million flies attracted to the scent. The river, which had been clear moments before, began to change color. Thick, dark ribbons of red swirled in the current. The water turned into blood. The Japanese soldiers kicked the bodies into the ravine. They laughed. They lit cigarettes. They cleaned their swords on the uniforms of the dead. To them, it was just a chore, a day's work. But miracles happen even in hell. A few men survived. They had been stabbed but not killed. They fell into the piles of corpses and lay still. Imagine lying there for hours, crushed under the weight of your dead friends, feeling their blood soak into your clothes, holding your breath every time a guard walked by to finish off a survivor. They waited until nightfall. Under the cover of darkness, they clawed their way out of the mass grave. They were covered in gore, looking like demons rising from the earth. They crawled into the jungle. They lived to tell the story. Back on the main road, the American column kept marching. We didn't know the specifics, but we felt it. We smelled it. The wind shifted, and a scent drifted over us from the direction of the river. It wasn't the smell of rotting vegetation. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse. We looked at the empty road where the Filipinos had been, and we realized that on this march, death wasn't just a possibility. It was the plan. We walked faster. The fear of the bayonet was now replaced by the fear of the sword. We knew that at any moment, they could turn us off the road, lead us into a ravine, and end us just as easily. The Pantingan River Massacre remains the darkest secret of the Death March, a testament to how thin the line is between a soldier and a murderer. After 5 days of walking, after 65 miles of heat and murder, We reached the town of San Fernando. We saw train tracks. We saw locomotives. For a brief, foolish second, we felt relief. We thought, thank God, we don't have to walk anymore. We get to ride. We didn't know that the walk was purgatory, but the train was hell. The Japanese herded us towards small steel boxcars. 40 and 8s. They were called in World War I, designed to hold 40 men or 8 horses. But the guards didn't stop at 40. They shoved us in with rifle butts. Move back. More. They packed 100 men into a car designed for 40. We were squeezed together so tightly that no one could sit. No one could even move their arms. We were a solid block of humanity, pressed chest to back, skin to skin. Then, they slammed the heavy steel doors shut. And they locked them. The darkness was instant. The heat rose immediately. The sun beat down on the steel roof, turning the boxcar into an oven. The temperature inside hit 110, then 120 degrees. There was no air. The only ventilation came from tiny slits near the roof, but they were too high to reach. Panic set in. Men started screaming. They clawed at the walls. They clawed at each other. The air grew thin. It smelled of unwashed bodies, rotting wounds, and terror. Then, the inevitable happened. Men lost control of their bowels. The floor became a slick of waste. The stench was toxic. People started to faint. But there was nowhere to fall. If a man died, and they did die, by the dozens, he didn't hit the floor. He died standing up, held in place by the pressure of the living bodies around him. You could feel the man next to you go cold. You could feel his weight sag against you, but you couldn't move away. You had to ride with the dead. The train ride lasted only 4 hours, but it felt like 4 years. When the train finally stopped at Capas and the doors opened, the fresh air hit us like a hammer. Bodies tumbled out of the doors like sacks of grain. The living crawled over the dead, gasping, crying, kissing the ground. We had survived the iron ovens, but we had only arrived at the graveyard. We walked the final few miles to Camp O'Donnell. It was an unfinished Philippine army base. It wasn't a prison camp. It was a swamp of death. There was one water spigot for 50,000 men. One. To get a drink, you had to stand in line for 12 hours under the sun. Men died waiting in line for water. The latrines overflowed instantly. The camp was covered in a layer of human waste. And then came the flies. Blue bottle flies. They covered everything. If you opened your mouth to speak, you swallowed a fly. They laid eggs in the open wounds of the living. But the center of the horror was the hospital. We called it the Zero Ward, or St. Peter's Ward. It was a building with a bamboo floor and a thatched roof. No medicine, no doctors, no hope. If you went into the Zero Ward, you didn't come out. Men lay on the bamboo slats, naked, skeletal, their eyes wide and staring. They were dying of dysentery. They were literally defecating themselves to death. The floor was slippery with fluids. The smell was so overpowering that even the guards wouldn't go near it. Every morning, the burial details would come. We carried our friends out on bamboo shutters. We walked them to the edge of the camp, to the mass graves. We were too weak to dig deep holes. The graves were shallow. When the rains came, the earth would wash away. You would see hands and feet sticking out of the mud. The wild dogs would come at night. In the first 6 weeks at Camp O'Donnell, 1,600 Americans died. But the Filipinos suffered even worse. Without the natural immunity to some of the diseases, they died by the thousands. 20,000 Filipino soldiers died in that camp in just 2 months. It was a genocide by neglect. When liberation finally came in 1945, when the Rangers stormed the camps at Cabanatuan and Bilibid, we were different men. We were ghosts. We came home to a country that called us heroes. But we didn't feel like heroes. We felt like survivors of a shipwreck. We carried Bataan with us forever. We carried it in our damaged nerves, our blinded eyes, our scarred lungs. We carried it in our nightmares. I still dream about the water. I dream about the artesian well spilling onto the ground. I dream about the man dying standing up in the boxcar. The Bataan Death March taught us the absolute limits of human endurance. It taught us that civilization is a thin veneer, and underneath, we are all just animals trying to survive. But it also taught us loyalty. We carried each other. When a man couldn't walk, we dragged him. When a man couldn't eat, we fed him. We left 10,000 bodies on that road and in those camps. But we never left them in spirit. Decades later, the road is paved. The jungle has grown back over the graves, but if you stand on the road to San Fernando in the heat of April, you can still feel it. The dust, the heat, and the silent tramp of thousands of feet, the battling bastards of Bataan. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam, but we had each other. And in the end, that was enough. This concludes our series on the Bataan Death March. It is a story of the darkest cruelty and the brightest brotherhood. Thank you for walking this hard road with us on Beneath the Metal. Please subscribe, share, and remember the fallen, lest we forget.